Hey everyone, my name is Michelle Blodgett. I am the Michigan Agriculture in the Classroom program leader in the state of Michigan, based in Lansing, Michigan. I want to welcome you to our national virtual Ag in the Classroom conference sponsored by BASF, CHS Foundation, and Corteva Agriscience. I also want to thank you, all the attendees, for taking the time out of your summer to join us for this amazing conference and being able to share these resources with you. So we appreciate our sponsorship and appreciate your time to support agricultural literacy at your local programs. We're glad that you can be a part of this. We encourage you to stay for each session, and remember that these sessions are being recorded and will be available on the National Agriculture in the Classroom website and our YouTube page probably sometime next week. Give us some time there. And we're excited to bring the next session to you. So the next session is Not Another Thanksgiving Story, Understanding the Origins of Native Agriculture. And that is coming to us. Let me get my notes here. Jasmine Locklear will be our presenter this hour. She serves as NAEF or NAAF's Associate Program Officer. She earned her bachelor's degree from BYU, Idaho in horticulture production in 2016. Prior to joining NAEF, Jasmine spent 5 years as an agriculture education teacher and an FFA advisor in rural North Carolina. So welcome, Jasmine, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Give me just a second and I will share my screen with you. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
You are all set.
Perfect, thank you. So, good afternoon, I'm Jasmine Locklear. I come from NAF, as she told you all, but I'm also a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. I originally presented this with a good friend of mine, and her name is April Parrott. She's at the Tribal Agriculture Fellowship, but it'll be just me sharing with you today. So when I created this presentation, we named it Not Another Thanksgiving Story because generally most folks' only understanding or knowledge about any indigenous ag has something to do with Thanksgiving. So we're going to pop right along. If you have questions, feel free to stop, ask me. I'd be more than happy to answer you. I'll try to keep an eye on the little chat box as well. Okay, so we originally gave these in Orlando, so in Florida. And so the first thing that I've added into here, and this is a super easy peasy way to always incorporate indigenous peoples into your lessons, is to give a small land acknowledgement. And so the current inhabitants of Florida are the Seminole and the Miccosukee tribes of Florida. But the former inhabitants I've listed at the top as well. They make up to the 3 federally recognized Seminole tribes. The 3rd tribe resides in Oklahoma, and due to their forced removal along the Trail of Tears. And I just thought this was a pretty cool photo. So most folks don't know that the Everglades are considered sacred spaces to indigenous peoples. And so I thought it was a pretty great photo when I was looking through. So here are some of our session objectives, and they'll change a little bit because we're doing this virtually and not in person. So we're going to talk about and understand the methods of ag utilized in indigenous communities in the present and in the past. We're going to learn about traditional or tribal ecological knowledge by utilizing storytelling and lessons. And then we're going to analyze some of those traditional stories and be familiarized with new tribal nations, traditional foods, and their geographical regions. And then you'll also learn about how to incorporate Native educational resources into your everyday learning activities. So, and I do want you guys to answer this. So what are some of the things that you all were taught about Native peoples in schools? Or when you were in school specifically, or maybe that you teach your kids?
Jasmine, if they raise their hand, I can unmute them for you if you'd like them to speak.
Yeah, that would be great.
So everyone just use your raise hand feature. Okay, Linda.
Yes, unfortunately, we were taught all the stories of white supremacy and not the real stories of the Native American ways. It's a tragedy, and even now, learning them, it's heartbreaking of the real story. So we're not taught the accurate history.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share what they learned? Okay, so this photo is actually like the general depiction of, hey, this is what happened on Thanksgiving, which is why I listed it, and because it normally is, like Linda said, you learn one-sided stories when you learn about Indigenous history. And so most folks are taught about a couple things, one of them being Thanksgiving. And then a couple folks in my last class told me that they learned about the Trail of Tears. And generally those are what folks tell me they learned in the way of anything Native. So, we're going to go through a couple different definitions just so you all have an understanding of what it is that I'm talking about when we're going over it. One of them is oral storytelling. So oral storytelling, I'm sorry, y'all, I can't talk today. Oral storytelling is the way in which traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, has been passed down from generation to generation in most Indigenous cultures. It connects our present, past, and future, and often stories share our cultural beliefs, our agricultural practices, and other tribal-specific knowledge. I loved that the National Park Service had this definition of traditional ecological knowledge. And theirs is the ongoing accumulation of knowledge, practice, and belief about relationships between living beings in a specific ecosystem that is acquired by Indigenous people over hundreds or thousands of years through direct contact with the environment, handed down through generations, and used for life-sustaining ways. So this knowledge includes relationships between people, plants, animals, natural phenomenon, landscapes, and timing of events or activities like hunting, fishing, trapping, agriculture, and forestry. It encompasses the worldview of a people, which includes ecology, spirituality, human and animal relationships, and more. So the important thing about this definition is that that may change for every tribe. It may be a little different everywhere. I can't give you one solid definition because I can't speak for everyone. But generally, this was a pretty broad overview, and I liked it. The same will go for Indigenous agriculture. So this looks different amongst every tribe. So this is one that we pieced together with, or I pieced together with a couple of interns and Taft Fellows. And so Indigenous agriculturalists were the original land stewards of these lands. It's innately sustainable in practice and guided by Indigenous ways of knowing for managing, protecting, restoring, and honoring land, food, and water by Indigenous people. Indigenous ag is inherently regenerative agriculture and has been since time immemorial. So a common belief among many Indigenous peoples is that we've been on these lands since time immemorial, which is why we have these specific relationships with our lands, foods, languages, etc. There we go. So this is the point where I stopped my presentation the last time, and we did some of the stories together. So I know that you all have to unmute them, but I can read the stories so we don't have to like popcorn around. And then if we can like talk about each of them, I'll explain like some of their significances, why we utilize them, so on and so forth, if that's all right. So there's 3 different stories that I have, actually it may be 4. One of them is Salmon Boy. One of them is Releasing the Buffalo, and one of them is The Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is probably what we'll start with. So generally, The Three Sisters is probably one of the stories that I feel is most commonly known. The Three Sisters is different amongst many Southeastern tribes. And it's told just a tad bit differently. And so one of the versions that we have is I'm going to share with us. I'm pretty sure it's from the Haudenosaunee people. I'll share it with you. But what I want you to think about as we go through these stories is, what can your students learn from each of these lessons or from each of these stories that is directly agriculturally related? How can you utilize those stories in your classroom, and what will those stories teach your students, whether that be historically or in the present? So give me just a second and I will pull up that first story so you guys can read along with me as I go. Okay. All right. So this is the first story, and I'll zoom it in a little if that's easier for everyone to see. It comes from the Oneida. They're located in upstate New York. And this is one of the versions of the Haudenosaunee legend of the Three Sisters. So very long ago, there were three sisters who lived in a field. The youngest was so small she could not yet walk. She crawled along the ground dressed in green. The middle sister wore a bright yellow dress and darted back and forth across the field. The elder sister stood tall and straight, and her body bent with the wind. She had long yellow hair and wore a green shawl. The three sisters loved one another very much and could not imagine living without the others. One day, a little Indian boy came to the field. He was very handsome, and he knew the ways of the land. He could talk with the birds and the animals, and was straight and fearless. The three sisters were very interested in this boy and they watched him use his stone knife to carve a bowl or hunt with his bow and arrow. Late in the summer of the boy's first visit to the field, the youngest of the three sisters disappeared. She was the one who could only creep along the ground. She could not even stand unless there was a stick she could cling to. But she was gone, and the other two sisters mourned her until the fall. The Indian boy returned to the field to gather reeds that grew at the edge of the small stream. He used the reeds to make arrow shafts. The two remaining sisters again watched him, fascinated. That night, the second sister disappeared, the one who always wandered hither and yon. Now there was only one sister left, the tall and straight sister. She did not bow her head in sorrow, though she mourned deeply and thought she could not live in the fields alone without her sisters. As the days grew shorter and colder, her green shawl began to lose its color, and her yellow hair became dry and tangled. Night and day she sighed for her sisters, but her voice was low like the wind, and no one heard her. One day in the harvest season, the little Indian boy heard the third sister crying, and he felt sorry for her. He took her in his arms and carried her to his home, and there a delightful surprise awaited her. Her sisters were there in the lodge, safe and very glad to be reunited. They explained that they had been curious about the little Indian boy and had followed him home, and they had decided to stay because winter was coming and his home was warm and comfortable. The sisters were making themselves useful to the boy and his family. The youngest, now all grown up, kept the dinner pot full, while the second sister, still in her yellow dress, dried herself on the shelf so she could fill the dinner pot later in winter. The eldest sister was so pleased to be with her sisters again and so impressed with the help they gave the boy that she too began drying herself so the family would have meal to use as the winter went on. And from that day to this, the three sisters were never separated again. So I listed the source at the bottom of these, and I can share those as well later. I'm going to pop back over. So if we can do the hand raise feature again, so that we can talk about some of the things that you learn in the Three Sisters to be able to teach in your class, that would be great. So one of my goals when we were creating this was to make it so that anyone could utilize the resources. So you could do this in grade school, you could do it in a middle school, you could do it all the way up to a high school. So no answer is a wrong answer. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about the story and how you could incorporate that in class. And with that, I will let you start raising hands and we'll chit chat a bit about it. I know it's hard to be as interactive over Zoom. Would anybody like to share?
We have one comment in here for you. The American Museum of Indian and Smithsonian offered a teacher training PD last month for the New York City Department of Education and all the teachers. It was excellent. And there are 2 locations in New York City and Maryland. They're fabulous resources.
Yeah, so I actually was there last week. They are pretty cool resources. There's a treaty exhibit at the National Museum of the American Indian in DC. And so part of the Haudenosaunee stories about their confederacy and how they worked with the government was there. But I think one of the cool things about the American Indian Museum is that they do offer those resources. So they're a great place to look or to go to when you are in need of resources for your classroom. They're generally pretty accurate. They get that information from all over the country because they have those ties with different tribal nations, even going down into indigenous people in South America. And so I think that's pretty cool. I will share with you one of the things that I really love about this story. One of them is the act of reciprocity, but another one of them is intercropping. And so I always, as a teacher, that was one of the things that my students and I always did is we intercropped. And it may not just be, corns, bean, and squash, which is what this story is really about. It may have been, I don't know, tomatoes and marigolds or whatever we came up with, but intercropping is directly reciprocal, and it helps the Three Sisters specifically help with soil, shading of the plants, and a multitude of other things, which is one of the reasons why I really like to share it. When you are teaching it in class, there are tons of things you can do from it, right? So you could grow a Three Sisters garden. You could complete plans for intercropping with other plants and vegetables, which is one of the things that I always had my students do. Or just learn about seed germination. And how utilizing each of those seeds or how germinating each of those seeds and what time periods they need to finish that helps them once they're growing together. So our next story is going to be one of my favorites. So it's Salmon Boy. And Salmon Boy is pretty cool because it has the same thing that we have with the Three Sisters, which is it's told in a multitude of ways through from multiple cultures or from multiple tribes rather. But the specific one that I have is from the Central Council of the Tlingit in Juneau, Alaska. And so it's as long ago. Oh, I will share so you guys can read with me. So long ago among the Haida people, there was a boy who showed no respect for the salmon. Though the salmon meant life for the people, he was not respectful of the one his people called Swimmer. His parents told him to show gratitude and to behave properly, but he did not listen. When fishing, he would step on the bodies of the salmon that were caught, and after eating, he carelessly threw the bones into the bushes. Others warned him that the spirits of the salmon were not pleased by such behavior, but he did not listen. One day his mother served him a meal of salmon. He looked at it with disgust. "This is moldy," he said, though the meat was good. He threw it upon the ground. Then he went down to the river to swim with the other children. However, as he was swimming, a current caught him and pulled him away from the others. It swept him into the deepest waters, and he could not swim strongly enough to escape from it. He sank into the river and drowned. There, deep in the river, the salmon people took him with them. They were returning back to the ocean without their bodies. They had left their bodies behind for the humans and animal people to use as food. The boy went with them, for now he belonged to the salmon. When they reached their home in the ocean, they looked just like human beings. Their village there in the ocean looked much like his own home, and he could hear the sounds of children playing in the stream which flowed behind the village. Now the salmon people began to teach him. He was hungry, and they told him to go to the stream and catch one of their children, who were salmon swimming in the stream. However, he was told he must be respectful, and after eating, return all of the bones and everything he did not intend to eat to the water. Then he was told their children would be able to come back to life, but if the bones were not returned to the water, the salmon could not come back. He did as he was told, but one day after he had eaten, when it came time for the children to come up from the stream, he heard one of them crying. He went to see what was wrong. The child was limping because one of its feet was gone. Then the boy realized he had not thrown all of the fins back into the stream. He quickly found the fin he had missed, threw it in, and the child was healed. After he'd spent the winter with the salmon people, it was spring and time for them to return to the rivers. The boy swam with them, where he belonged to the salmon people now. When they swam past his village, his own mother caught him in her net. When she pulled him from the water, even though he was in the shape of a salmon, she saw the copper necklace he was wearing. It was the same necklace she had given her son. She carried Salmon Boy carefully back home. She spoke to him and healed him, and gradually he began to shed his salmon skin. First, his head emerged. Salmon Boy taught the people all of the things he had learned. He was a healer now and helped them when they were sick. "I cannot stay with you long," he said. "You must remember what I teach you." He remained with the people until the time came when the old salmon who had gone upstream and not been caught by the hunters or the animal people came drifting back down towards the sea. As Salmon Boy stood by the water, he saw a huge old salmon floating down towards him. He was so worn out by his journey that he could see through its sides. He recognized it as his own soul, and he thrust a spear into it, and as he did, he died. Then the people of his village did as he had told them to do. They placed his body into the river. It circled 4 times and then sank, going back to his home in the ocean, back to the salmon people. And so I also have the source listed here for that, and I can share it with you all as well. And so I kind of pulled some focuses from these earlier, or project ideas that I would place with these, but I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts are, what you feel like you could teach your students from reading the story about Salmon Boy as far as agriculture practices go, whether they be like former teachings or things that could be taught presently and could be utilized now. And you can drop those in the chat, or we can raise hands and do it that way. Brittany? Michelle, can we unmute Brittany?
Yeah, I'm figuring
Okay.
it out.
Sorry, I was trying to do it, it didn't let me.
Yep. I'm getting there.
Okay,
Welcome to technology, right?
right.
Oh, sorry, I thought we got her. No, let's see, yeah. For some reason, she has to unmute herself. It looks like, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I was just gonna say, the part about putting the bones back, it just kind of reminded me of utilizing what you need, but then also, you know, not wasting anything. So that was one thing that I kind of thought about, and maybe in terms of like, you know, if you have a garden or other types of things, teaching students to kind of utilize everything and not be wasteful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really cool, that brings up a really cool point. Could be a really cool lesson on composting. Teaching them not to waste anything by composting whatever they have left over. Would anyone else like to share? I think we had another hand, but I'm out of.
Sarah Hale had said composting, and then you had put in there, I
Ah.
believe, also nutrient management and recycling.
Yeah, those are really cool things that we can share with our kids. Another thing that I thought about as I read this, so often we taught about like fish farming or aquaculture systems. And so as I read about it, and he talked about, the boy goes back with the people once he hasn't been caught after the season is over, essentially. I think that could be a really cool lesson to teach students about fish wheels. So for lots of those folks who are living in Alaska or even the Pacific Northwest, where you hear lots about salmon, it's a cool opportunity to teach students how to build fish wheels, teach them the life cycles of salmon and how they're born, how they live, what cycles they go through to become grown adults. Anyone else?
We also see those in Michigan as well. So
Yeah. I know I forget you guys. So I work with a lot of Pacific Northwesterners.
that's
And
okay.
so, yeah, I work with lots of folks from like Washington State. And so I'm super familiar with what goes on there, but it's always super nice to hear about what you have going on in your communities too.
Yep. Midwest and the Great Lakes have a lot of salmon.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So one of the things I also like to add in is that this is also a cool opportunity to teach students about full-blown aquaculture systems, not sisters. And so you can talk to them about, cage culture, circular pens, and like the different methods of how folks are growing salmon without them just being wild caught salmon. So in a lot of communities that have fishing rights, they'll have those fishing rights, but that doesn't mean that you can go in and harvest more than you need. But there are also lots of farmers who are taking a different approach and using aquaculture systems to continually grow the population of salmon so that they don't have to so that nobody is depleting our wild resources there. I think we might have time for one more. And I think the third one that I have is releasing the buffalo. Let me share my screen. Okay. So releasing the buffalo comes from the Apache in Dulce, New Mexico. Long ago, they were camping about over on the plains without food. They were playing the hoop and pole game. Raven came from nobody knew where and took off his quiver. Inside the quiver were intestines. Magpie took them out. They watched Raven to see which way he would start home. When it was evening, he started off flying up toward the sky hole. You must all watch him, they said to each other. Everyone was looking at him. He kept circling until he became very small and you could see him. When he was so far off that no one else could see him, Rattlesnake and Bat still couldn't make him out. When he was at the top of the sky and out of sight, he flew across the way to the east, where the Black Mountains range from north to south. When he reached them, he went to the junction of canyons. Only the two could see him. The people moved their camp 4 times before they came to him. They found he had much meat there, which he distributed to the people. They asked him about the buffalo, but he would not tell them. Then they changed an Apache into a puppy, making eyes for him of black obsidian. They hid him under a brush bed and moved their camp away. The children of Raven came around the deserted camp, and finding the dog, took him up. Raven's smallest child folded his arms about him and carried him home. His father told the children he was lying there to find out something. The child did not want to give up the dog. When it was burning, brought it near the dog's eyes. After a while, he cried, "Oh, you may keep it. It's only a dog. It does not know anything," the father said. "Its name will be Choke," said the child. Raven had the buffalo all shut up. He opened the door when he wanted to kill some of them. That was the way that he secured the meat. The dog went along with them and they fed it. When it was dark and they had all gone to bed, the dog went over and opened the door. The buffalo started out. They had nearly all gone out before Raven noticed it. He ran over there with his quiver, shooting at them as they reeled past. When all his arrows were gone but one, he looked at the door for the man who had become a dog. An old buffalo was going out that could hardly get to its feet. The man caught hold of this buffalo and went out with it, clinging to the opposite side. Raven paid no attention to it and stood there holding his bow with the one arrow, looking for the man in vain. The man overtook the others who had moved their camp away. "I turned the buffalo all loose," he told them. They turned back, moving their camp to the buffalo, where they killed many of them and were no longer hungry. Raven told his children, "You will live on the meat that is left on the backbone and on the eyeballs." Long ago they were hungry, but he let the buffalo out, and then they had plenty to eat. That way he did. Okay. So, what are our thoughts about, and I think we have a chat. What are our thoughts about this story and what you could teach? I know it's a little more difficult. I think it was probably the more difficult of the three stories. But what could your students learn from releasing the buffalo?
We got a quiet group. Are there any ideas that you could help prompt their thinking?
So one of the things that I always think is pretty cool, and so this kind of serves as a history lesson too, but buffalo were one of the ways that Indigenous people were able to have subsistence. And so when the Americas were colonized, the buffalo were killed off in the masses. And so one of the things I think is just a cool way to incorporate that is what Indigenous people use the buffalo for. As a former animal science teacher, is I thought it was cool to teach our students the cuts of meat. So we often learn cattle and hogs, but buffalo is a little different. They're grown differently. You harvest different portions of their meat for different reasons. And so learning the cuts of meat is always a really cool activity, I feel like. Another one that I think is super, super cool, and we actually have a NAF grantee who does this every year at her school, or at their school. There's a couple, I think, that do it. They actually work with their tribe locally, and they are allowed to harvest a buffalo on campus. And when they harvest that buffalo, the students are able to participate, but they also learn really valuable lessons in utilizing everything that comes from that animal, whether that be bones or, in the story it talks about the eyes or whatever. So they utilize every portion of that. And then another super cool one is just researching buffalo production. So not a lot of folks know that there are buffalo farmers who, actually farm and herd buffalo every day. And so researching buffalo production in the United States, buffalo are pretty amazing animals. They live for what feels like ever, but they're also, actually there's a buffalo on my little background screen. Forgot I had chosen that one today, but they're pretty amazing animals and they have a multitude of uses. And so even learning the byproducts of buffalo, I think those give really cool opportunities for you to teach about animal science specifically in your class. Or even a dissection lesson, if there is, we always dissected eyes in biology or any of those other things that you could think of. I think those are pretty cool opportunities for students. Anyone else have any ideas? Donna. It tells me that Donna raised her hand, but I don't see it. Okay. I think you have to unmute yourself, Donna, if you still wanted to share
And
something.
I'm trying to find her name in the,
Here I am.
okay,
Okay.
Can
perfect.
you hear me?
Yes.
My thought was, at the end of the story, it talks about the raven was left to basically pick at the bones to survive. And so I thought, a really cool lesson to go along with that could be the ecological interactions of, the other prairie animals that kind of survive alongside bison in a prairie environment.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. There's this really cool, and it's not about buffalo, but it incorporates buffalo. There's this really cool video of what happened to Yellowstone after wolves were reintroduced. And so I think that you could do something similar to that. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Or even, we just got back from a vacation to South Dakota, and we visited Wind Cave National Park, and they talk about, the origin of the bison people, coming out of the cave. And so it might be interesting from a literature perspective to maybe compare different, the different bison stories within the different indigenous stories of bison and how they came to be or how they were used and things like that.
Yeah, there's a really cool bison story. It's called White Buffalo Calf Woman, which talks about, how indigenous folks find the white buffalo to be sacred, and why it's sacred. So that might be another one to add to your list if that's something you're interested in as well. Also, I'm super proud of you for vacationing in South Dakota.
It's a beautiful state.
I did North Dakota, and I was like, this looks like home. All right. So my last one is normally the origin of strawberries. And I don't think that we'll have time to get all the way through that one. But I will share with you some of the things, and I actually pulled that story from the Eastern Band of Cherokee here in North Carolina. But I will share with you some of the things that I really enjoy, or some of the lessons that I feel like you could teach students about the origins of strawberries. So one of the coolest things I think I ever did when I was a student was our ag teacher let us extract DNA from strawberries. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And so it could be a really easy way to teach about strawberry DNA extraction. It's a really good opportunity to teach about scientific usage or plant identification of native species, because the story specifically refers to wild strawberries. And as you all probably know, wild strawberries are much smaller in size, and they have a much different flavor than what you would probably get in the store or even what you've gotten on local farms. And another really cool lesson I think that you can always provide with any kind of berries is to make or create dyes. You smash the berries and you turn it into dyes. That is traditionally what most indigenous folks would have done to dye linens or clothing anyway. But how many kids wouldn't love to tie-dye shirts after they've eaten strawberries and all that good jazz? So I have a list of resources that I want to share with you. Well, I had a list. I think I might have the wrong presentation. At the end of this one, it only has illuminative, but I think it's worth showing to you all. Hold on one second. So illuminative is one of the, I'm pulling my presentation now. Give me just a second. I think I didn't save my last slide, and it had all my extra resources on it.
We have a response here in the chat as well that I'll share while you're still looking. Seed
Yes.
saving with strawberries as well.
That's a really cool one. Kids are always surprised at how many seeds are actually in a strawberry. Okay. So I somehow lost my last slide. Y'all will have to forgive me for that one. Last 2 slides, not sure where they went. But one of the resources that I had included was Illuminative. And I will pull it up and share it with you really quickly. One of the things on the Illuminative website that I really like, especially if you're teaching to high schoolers, and so I try to be inclusive of everyone, but I was a former high school ag teacher, and so one of the things that they have is lesson plans. And so, and they may not be ag related, but I think they're cool ways to incorporate native things as well. So you can scroll through here and they have a plethora of information for and activities. And so a couple of these, like they group from pre-K to 2nd grade, and they've done much of the same thing. They talk about the medicine wheel, the legend of, dream catchers, and a lot of these are also story based. And they've got a 3rd through 5th grade set, 6th through 8th, and then other K through 12 teaching and resources. But one of my personal favorites is they have, if you've never seen it, it's totally worth watching, the Gather documentary, which is on Netflix right now. And so they have a Gather guide that talks about traditional food harvesters and indigenous foods in general, and talks about that traditional ecological knowledge and incorporates storytelling and all of those good things, but it's all ag based, whether it's from a forestry stance, from fishing and wildlife, or from harvesting crops. So Gather is one of my favorites right now, and I think that's super worthwhile to watch. Otherwise, I am going to drop my email in. I'll drop my email in the chat. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to share other information with you or resources with you. We're also working on creating a high school curriculum. And so I'd be happy to share any of the lesson plans that we have or anything of that nature as well.
Thanks, Jasmine. We
You're
appreciate your
welcome.
time and sharing your story and all the great stories that connect back to agriculture and the Native American culture as well. So thank you again for an outstanding presentation. Thank you to our viewers for dropping by. We are certain you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really cool to hear some of those stories and how you can connect back to the classroom. Our next presentation will be begin promptly on the hour. You can watch the secondary track or use the other link provided to switch from one to the other. We are going to start at 3 o'clock Eastern time, top of the hour. We're going to hear from Andrea Gardner, the big deal about big ag. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us. And we will see you at the top of the hour for the big deal about big ag. Thank you.